All right, let's look through some formulas real quick before we go into the ICP solutions. All right, so what we have seen is in Chapter 6 how to go about putting together that budgeted plan, our master static budget. And then in 7, we have seen how we can take that information, those standard quantities allowed times their standard rate, and calculate numbers to go into our flexible budget. But we use the actual quantity, so the actual number of units that we resulted in selling, we use that quantity to flex our numbers. All right, so here I've put together our columns. We've got the master static budget column over here to the far right, and we have the actual results over here to the far left, and then in the center is that flexible one. All right, so when we're talking about our revenues, how much we sell things for, in the master static budget, it's the budgeted quantity, how many management expects for our salespeople to sell, times the budgeted price, what we think we can get for those per unit. All right. The actual results is the actual quantity we ended up selling times the actual price that we ended up getting for those. And then in the center, the flexible column is the actual quantity that we're bringing over from the actual results, but times the budgeted price, or what we had originally planned. Now, we can go and calculate the differences between these three columns. If we do that here, we're going to have a sales volume variance. And over here on this side, we would have our flexible budget variance. And we could have a row specific just to the revenue differences. All right, let's scroll on down, and I want to show you some additional formulas in regards to our direct cost. Now again, we're still going to be using our same headers. All right. Oops. So we have got our master static budget, our actual budget on the far left, and our flexible in the middle. All right, so our master static budget for our elements that are direct cost, those direct materials, those direct labor, those kinds of items that are variable in nature in regards to producing our product or service. All right, so let's review what's in the master static budget. We are using the budgeted quantity of units, and we're multiplying that times the standard input allowed. If we're talking about direct materials, how many pounds of whatever does it take to make a unit according to our information, according to what we are allowing in the process, according to the engineers, according to production, okay? And then we're multiplying that times the standard cost. What do we believe we can purchase those pounds at per each? Okay, so budgeted quantity times the standard input allowed times the standard cost. Now you'll notice, guys, that I've put down here BQ times BIA times BC. I want you to just understand that those standards are those budgeted numbers. If you want to change how you write this out, that is completely fine with me. So budgeted quantity times budgeted input allowed times budgeted cost. Okay, so that's what we would expect to see. Now, over here on the actual results column, if I can move this bar up just a touch, we have got our actual results. What was the actual quantity times the actual input times the actual cost for those inputs? Okay, so actual quantity times the actual input times the actual cost. How many units did we make? How many pounds or hours, if we're talking about direct labor, did it actually take each unit? Times the actual cost for those. And then we can look at the flexible column. And notice that again, we are still using actual quantity. How many units of whatever did we provide this period? But we're taking it and we're saying, for that actual quantity, how many standard input units were allowed? Was it 2 pounds of material? Was it 1 hour of direct labor? What was it we were expecting to put in? All right, so standard input allowed. And then taking that further and multiplying it times what we expected that to cost us per unit, per pound, per hour. So therefore you're getting actual quantity times the budgeted input allowed times the budgeted cost. And the reason why I'm trying to highlight this to you guys is we are going to take and calculate differences here in this column that I have shaded in dark gray. We are going to calculate the differences here in regards to our efficiency or use of materials or use of time, and our price variances related to what we pay for items versus what we had originally expected to pay for those units. All right, so I've got a second page here for you that I need to see if I can move my headers over, but I guess I can't. Here I'm trying to show you by taking this information and going a little bit further that we can break this information down. All right, so you guys see here that I'm comparing the column from the actual in this column, and over here is our flexible budget column. All right, so actual column versus flexible budget column. Again, what did we have? Actual quantity times actual price. And in the flexible, we would have had actual quantity times the standard quantity allowed instead of the actual quantity. And then we're multiplying it times the budgeted price or our standard cost for what we expected. This gives us the total materials variance. You can see over here I also have one, and this actually needs to say labor. But we can break down this flexible budget variance into total materials variance and total labor variance. But then each one of those can be broken down into a price variance and an efficiency variance. So what we would be looking at for those price variances is actual quantity times actual price minus actual quantity times standard price. All right, so all we're doing is taking the actual quantities of whatever it was that we used and multiplying it times the actual price or the budgeted standard price, depending on which one you're filling in here, and calculating the difference. And that total dollar amount right there is just in relation to the difference in pricing. So notice that the only two things that are different here in Formula 1 and Formula 2 is actual price versus standard price or budgeted price. The materials efficiency variance can be broken down in the same way, except we're going to change the formula a little bit. Actual quantity times the standard or budgeted price minus the standard quantity times the standard price. So notice that standard price is the same in both formulas, and the only thing that's different here is the quantity, or how efficiently we produced our items with the use of those materials. Same kind of deal over here to the far right when we're talking about our labor. Actual hours times the actual rate is our actual cost. And then our flexible column would have shown the actual quantity of units, but multiplying it times the standard quantity allowed. Alright, so instead of the actual hours, we're going to take the actual quantity of units and multiply it times the standard quantity allowed. And then we're going to multiply it times the budgeted price. Alright, and that would have given us the flexible amount that we would have expected for our labor. And we can compare it to what we actually spent on labor. And that can be broken down. That total labor variance can be broken down into labor price and labor efficiency. So again, we've got formulas here. Actual quantity times actual price for that labor versus or minus actual quantity times the standard price or the budgeted price, what we originally thought we would be able to get that labor for. So you can notice here the only change in line 1 versus line 2 is the price. That's how we're able to break out just the dollar amount of this total labor variance into just the part that reflects the variance due to a pricing or cost difference. And here we have our labor efficiency variance. Again, notice that the only thing that's different in line 1 versus line 2 is the quantity. Right? So we're looking at our efficient use of materials. Right, so if you want to take a few seconds, pause the video, maybe write some of these formulas down, that would be awesome. You guys can use that in your work. Also, don't forget that I've uploaded for you that chart showing you how all of this can be plotted out and how everything is very, very much related. In regards to pricing variances, think of the fact that our purchasing people are the ones that are in charge of negotiating prices for our raw materials. So that is can be affected by how skillfully they are able to negotiate pricing. Of course, we also have supply and demand issues. So if demand gets really high, we can expect for those prices to go up because we're going to be competing for those materials with our competition for those things that we all need to go into our products or services. What we pay for items is one thing. What about the quality of the items that we get? What if we are getting poor quality at the same time we are buying things at a cheaper price? Okay, so we may have a favorable price variance, but is that affecting us somewhere else? For example, the efficiency variance in the materials, or maybe the efficiency variance in the labor. All right? These kinds of things can affect different areas. I want you to now go and pull up your ICP, and let's roll through those. So on question number 1, flexible budgets accommodate changes in activity levels. We notice that we formulate that center column, and what we do is we use the actual results quantity, but all of our master static budget standard prices, standard amount of input in that flexible budget column. Number 2 here, we have got a question that is asking us to calculate what is our total sales volume variance for the month of July. And again, if you were to pull up that chart, the sales volume variances is the difference between the master static budget column and the flexible budget column. Okay, so again, if you go pull that up and take a look at it, I promise visualizing this will help you guys understand how you're breaking this down. All right, so what is the sales volume variance? It is only due to the change in volume or quantity of units sold. All right, our master static budget expected X number of units, where our flexible budget column has the actual quantity of units. All right, keeping that in mind, only change in quantity, we can then take that and use our contribution margin per unit times the number of units to calculate by how much would there be a variance, because the revenues per unit are always the same. The variable costs per unit are always the same. And then the fixed costs are the same. When you formulate the master static budget column versus the flexible budget column, all of those things remain the same. The only thing that changes is the quantity. So if you go and you calculate, our revenues would have been favorable by $1,200 because there were 100 extra units sold at $12 a piece. And then our variable cost could be calculated based on adding up the variable manufacturing cost shown in the static budget. So we've got $15,000 in variable manufacturing cost and $10,000 in variable marketing and admin. Taking that number of $25,000 and dividing it by the original master static budget quantity of 5,000 units means that we would have put $5 per unit in variable cost over in the flexible budget times a certain number, okay, and that would have been the 5,100. Okay, so the difference between the flexible column and the master static budget in regards to variable cost would have been a difference of 500 unfavorable. So if you need to, draw out those two columns, the master static budget column and the flexible budget column, and compare them that way, if that's what makes more sense to you. All right, we would have been able to see that it was a $700 favorable sales volume variance. And that is because we had $7 per unit in contribution margin, and we're multiplying that times the 100 extra units, the actual quantity, which would have been used in the flexible budget column, to give us that $700 favorable. So I've actually kind of typed out two different things for you here. If you want to pause the video and think about it for just a moment, please be my guest. On number 3, we have a company that has put together their master budget for the year, and they expect to produce 6,000 units of product monthly. Monthly. 6,000 times 12 then would equal the number of units planned for the entire year. So 72,000 units would be planned. Their master budget included an indirect labor of $396,000 budgeted for the year. That $396,000 can be broken down on a per unit basis based on that standard amount of time expected for indirect labor per unit times an indirect labor hourly rate. And that would give us the standard cost of indirect labor per unit. All right, so if we take the 396,000 and divide it by 72,000 units, then we would get a standard amount allowed for indirect labor per unit of $5.50 each. Now, what they're wanting us to do is look at the month of September. During the month of September, only 5,600 units of product were produced, and the actual indirect labor cost incurred were $30,970. Okay, so this is the actual incurred. A performance report utilizing flexible budgeting would report a flexible budget variance for indirect labor of what? Okay, so flexible budget variance has not broken it down into price variance and efficiency variance yet. We just want to see what is the total dollar amount that would have been expected using our standard costing for the quantity actually produced versus what we actually ended up paying. All right, so our actual labor, and actually that should say indirect labor here, is 30,970. But how can we go about calculating what our flexible budget would have shown? For 5,600 units, we would have expected so much in actual time, or budgeted time at a budgeted rate. And those two are the culmination here at 550 standard per unit that we just calculated. So 5,600 actual quantity times our standard allowed of 550 means we would have shown in our budgeted flexible budget column 30,800. 30,800 is cheaper than what we actually spent. What we actually spent is more expensive. Therefore, we have an unfavorable $170 total flexible budget variance. So if you guys need to visualize your information in columns, let me go and pull this up for you. Again, you are looking at the difference between the flexible budget and up here in this corner, which you guys can't see, the actual results, but the flexible budget variance is what we're calculating in that particular one. All right, so visualize this. Number 4, which of the following is not an advantage for using standard cost for variance analysis? Again, notice this is a question with the word not in it, so let's turn it around. Which of these 4 are an advantage for using standard cost for variance analysis? It definitely simplifies our product costing, okay, because it's easier to put all this stuff together if we have standards for what we expect our cost to be, therefore speeding up our process for assigning a selling price per unit for these items. And then standards are usually expressed on a per unit basis, just like what we saw just a moment ago. We can actually calculate the indirect labor per unit and the indirect labor hourly rate, multiply those together to give us a cost on a per unit basis for indirect labor. And our standards can take into account expected changes planned to occur in the budgeted period. Not only what we expect to pay for items, but improvements and efficiency gains that we strive to make in that continuous improvement environment that we need to be pushing. Alright, so then B is our answer. It's the one that stands out. Standards are developed using past cost and are available at a relatively low cost. I mentioned to you guys in the very last video that it's definitely not going to be available at a low cost. We have got to branch out and do some additional research, possibly pull in benchmarking information from other companies. We may even have to purchase data from firms such as E&Y and other companies that strive for gathering information in regards to best practices and benchmarking. And this stuff is not cheap due to those costs that we incur in order to do all of that. Number 5, we've got one here. You guys should hopefully recall from your earlier classes in accounting how Wiley Plus used to really make sure that you guys understood what you were doing, and they give you information where you've got to back your way into your answer. Well, a couple of these questions here that we're going to see on the remaining are actually pushing you to that point. When you guys take the CPA exam and the CMA exam, this is to the level that they expect for you to know how to get to the answer. Alright, so I'm trying to show you the visual way of thinking through these things, and then I'm also giving you the formulas. You guys have to be able to apply the information. Alright, so number 5 is a little challenging. Let's check it out. We've given the information on Pruitt Company's direct material cost for the month of July. Actual quantity purchased is 30,000 units. The actual unit purchase price is $2.75. Okay, so we can take that information and calculate out what was actually spent for the direct materials. They are telling us that we have a purchase price variance unfavorable to the tune of $1,500. So they are saying that our actual cost incurred was $1,500 more expensive than what we would have expected. All right, that means we paid more per unit for that material. All right, so if we take the actual cost incurred and subtract that unfavorable price variance, then we can calculate that $81,000 is what we would have expected to pay for those same quantity of materials. And that's this 30,000. So we can then take the 81,000 here and divide that by the actual quantity of 30,000 and calculate that our standard price was actually $2.70 instead of $2.75. Now they're wanting us to calculate what is our efficiency variance, all right, which is the other side of that flexible budget variance number. Again, if you guys were to go back and pull this little chart up here, again, I can't get the whole thing in here. Let me reduce this down for you. can't move the screen up. Here we go. Again, here's our actual results. Here's our flexible budget. The difference between the two was the flexible budget variance. What we were given is this, the price variance, and it was a number that we could use to back in to finding out what our flexible budget number is. And then what we're calculating now is the efficiency variance part of that. Okay, so here we have the fact that we had actual quantity of 22,000 units given, but our standard quantity allowed for our actual production, 24,000 units, which based on that formula that I gave you guys over here, actual quantity times standard quantity allowed is the other number, which was 24,000 units. We have got a difference of 2,000 units here. Okay, so 24,000 means we used 2,000 more units than was, we used 2,000 units less, 2,000 units actual was less. And we can multiply that times our standard price. So this 2,000 is the difference between actual quantity and budgeted quantity allowed for the same number of units actually produced, and calculate that we have a $5,400 favorable efficiency variance. Okay, because we used less units than what we would have expected to use for the same level of output. So 2,000 less times the standard price or budgeted price, the cost of that means we were 5,400 favorable in regards to efficiency. Number 6 is another one. You've kind of got to work your way through the information. We have got Garner Company's direct labor numbers for the month of September. They actually used 34,500 hours. However, the standard labor hours expected for the same actual quantity of output is 35,000 hours. So we used 500 hours less than what we would have expected to see for the same level of actual output. Our total direct labor payroll incurred was 241,500. That's the actual amount of total direct labor payroll. And they have given us what portion of that is related specifically to efficiency variance. $3,200 is related to a favorable efficiency variance. They want us to now go and pull in the numbers and calculate the other side of that. How much is the price or rate variance? All right, so let's take a look at the fact that we had a $3,200 efficiency variance. That $3,200 is directly related to the number of hours that we used, the difference in the two. So 500 hours less were used. 500 hours can therefore be divided into the 3,200 to be able to calculate the fact that our standard hourly was $6.40. $6.40 per labor hour is what we expected to have paid. And we can now take that 640 and multiply it times the standard hours, the actual hours, and calculate out $220,800 is what would have been expected at the rate of 640 versus what we actually paid of $241,500, and therefore the difference in the two here is $20,700. All right, so this, let me change this wording here. This $34,500 is the actual hours, but this 640 right here is our standard rate. All right, so again, we're breaking down the formulas that I showed you guys here on this one. All right, we're trying to calculate how much was due to pricing, how much was due to efficiency, and we were given enough information to find one to give us enough to back our way into the second one. So our price variance based on that is 20,700 unfavorable. Okay, so this is actual hours used times the actual rate, which gave us the actual payroll for the period. But then here we are using again the same actual hours, but we're changing the rate and using this standard rate or standard price that we calculated up here, and that's how we're able to calculate the price variance. Again, if you guys need to plot it out, go and use these columns here as examples. And then you're breaking this actual results column and this flexible budget column into the differences between the budgeted cost and the budgeted input allowed, so that we can see the price variance and the efficiency variance. All right, number 7. Performance evaluation using variance analysis should guard against emphasis on a single performance measure. Just like I mentioned earlier, just because we have a favorable price variance doesn't mean that we can not have to talk to our procurement people. Okay, they might have done a really good job at getting us a really good price, but cheaper is not always better, people. You may look over at your efficiency variances related to labor and say, whoa, why are we so unfavorable here? Well, maybe it's because we bought poor quality material for that really cheap price. All right, so evaluate what you're looking at, but do not just place emphasis on one single performance measure, because we can see results of that in other areas that may not be to the benefit of the company. Number 8, the basic principles and concepts of variance analysis can be applied to activity-based costing by application as to the levels of cost hierarchy. We could really drill down into our activity-based costing columns and apply our budgeting principles and control principles there as well. And number 9, benchmarking is making comparisons to direct attention as to why differences in cost exist across companies. And again, if we've got other companies that are performing better than we are, then we need to start researching more into the techniques and things that they are doing to run their companies better, so that we can hopefully utilize those same techniques and have those same efficiency gains, etc.